there were time where there were a lot of brick masons here in Chapel Hill, people of color.
Since Chapel Hill's beginnings, black builders and masons have played a key role in constructing the university's buildings, brick pathways, and stone walls, and in building homes, schools, churches, and other structures throughout Chapel Hill, Carrboro, and southern Orange County. In 1792, the Macaulay brothers donated 250 acres of land to help create the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and their family has handed down a story about the construction of the university's very first building, Old East. On the day that the cornerstone was to be laid, the massive cornerstone was lifted up with a rope, which broke. The story goes on to say that a man enslaved by the Macaulays, named Dave, stepped in to pick up the heavy stone by hand and set it in place, literally laying the foundation of the construction of UNC. Historical records show that the university's oldest buildings were constructed with enslaved labor. Some of these enslaved builders were carpenters or masons who were skilled artisans brought in by the white architects and contractors who enslaved them. Others were enslaved by university faculty and staff members. In the 18th and early 19th centuries, it was common for university officials to claim ownership of dozens of slaves and then hire out their labor for university building contracts or other purposes. Faculty member Elisha Mitchell is often credited for the iconic stone walls surrounding the university's campus. But the real work of the project was completed by enslaved workers whose labor profited Mitchell financially. In 1838, Mitchell initiated the project, and it was completed in 1844 by enslaved laborers, either enslaved by Mitchell himself or by other faculty members who rented out their labor to the university for the project. The walls took tremendous skill to build and have stood for nearly 200 years, being extended and repaired over that period of time by generations of local black masons, some of whom were descendants of those original enslaved builders. The Strayhorn family provides an excellent example of how the legacy of enslaved builders and masons carried forward through the generations. Tony and Nellie Strayhorn, who were born in slavery, bought land to build their home in 1879. Their great-granddaughter, Mrs. Dolores Clark, tells their story.
They both were slaves on different plantations in Orange County, and my great-grandfather was on the Strayhorn plantation, and my great-grandmother was on the Andrews plantation. Tony was separated from his mother. His mother was taken from him to Hillsborough and put on the block at Hillsborough for sale when he was only 7 years old. And after that, he stayed on the plantation until he was about 16 or 17. And then I guess just did some work around, and he learned how to do brickwork.
Today, Mrs. Clark lives in the home that her great-grandparents built nearly 150 years ago.
And so I'm trying to preserve the home because it's a very historical home that my great-grandfather and great-grandmother built, and they built it from scratch. They first built one room which was made out of logs. In that particular room, they cooked, ate, slept, and did everything until they were able to add on and make the additions. And they became farmers. They bought 30 acres of land in Carrboro, one of the first black owners in Carrboro. And when they started the farm, they added additions to their home because they started to raise their family. My great-grandfather, after they built the little log cabin and additions to the home, he read by the moonlight. And that's how he taught himself to read by the moonlight. So you had to be very cautious back in those days because, the Ku Klux Klan was very prominent in the area. And if they would see a light burning in your house, they would knock on your door to see what's going on, because they didn't want the black people to outdo them. So they had to be very cautious. And my great-grandmother told that story also. She said he was a smart man. I think he was smart because he became a minister. He became one of the founders of Rock Hill Baptist Church, which is now First Baptist. He was a magistrate. He married people. He was a Sunday school superintendent, the choir director at Rock Hill Baptist Church, and was very prominent person in the community. And he also did mason work, brickwork, and he taught his grandchildren how to do the work, which are my uncles. And everybody had a part, and they all had the responsibility learning to do things, work, so they could take care of their families. So my great-grandmother and great-grandfather, they had two children, Sally and William. Sally married a Barbie. She married Fred Bobby. So I'm not sure how they met, but they met and had 10 children. My grandfather was a brick mason.
Okay.
And my grandmother, she had to stay at home and take care of all those children. He taught his sons, Alfred and Willis, about bricklaying. And so that's how they learned. But my uncles have built so much out of stone and rock. Chapel Hill, even out in the countryside of Chapel Hill.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful work.
Like the Strayhorn and Barbie families, other families of black builders have carried forward the traditions of enslaved carpenters, brick masons, and stone masons, creating a generational legacy that has spanned over 200 years. In the past, as today, these builders were talented and skilled artisans. They had a trained eye that allowed them to visualize the work and see things that weren't yet there. That deep knowledge of the craft allowed them to create homes that were not only functional, but beautifully designed.
Actually, I was trained as a brick mason, and I became a stone mason in later years. Enjoyed doing stone work because it was very creative, and that was the part that really interests me. The term stonemason is misunderstood sometimes. Basically what we did in the local area was we were rock masons. Stone masons are different. Being a stonemason, you have to cut, shape, and make the stones fit. Rock mason is not that way. You just take a rock as it is and you lay it as it is. And the finished product, whether it's good or bad, is in the eye of the beholder.
Mm. Usually you can tell the difference between one mason and another because you're not going to always be the same, especially when you're talking about stonework. Brick is different because brick is more of a pattern. And it's repetition.
Right.
Stone is not.
Okay.
Because stone, you're placing different stones here. Every stonemason has a different eye or a different mindset or a different technique in terms of how they lay stone.
They would have to go and find the rocks. Had to be certain rocks that they used.
You had to break rocks and small rocks and things like that to fit how, like a puzzle, really.
We had a sludge hammer. I guess probably 10, 15, 20 pound sludge hammer that I could barely pick up. To bust a rock, you had to know where to hit the rock. It was a certain way that you hit it on the flat side, and it would bust. But either way, it was too hard for me.
With brick and blocks, everything is straight. It's dimensional. With stone, it is not dimensional. The secret is developing an eye. You have to develop an eye And when we say I, that means you can pick up a rock and find a place in the wall for it. It all is in how you see that rock and how it will fit into your design.
I just say it did the work because it looked good, you know. Sometimes me and my friend, we just ride around, you know, looking at different things, and she'd be talking, your granddaddy built all this. I said, that's right. And built brick houses too, you know, they did it all.
I just know the Brooks did First Baptist and probably did a lot with St. Paul and a couple of houses like in Sykes Street, Edwards Drive.
The Forest Theater, my father and my Uncle Jim built the Forest Theater. And Uncle Jim built the rock wall at the hospital entrance, the stone wall at the entrance. My nephew built the sign that's on 54. I think it said, "Welcome to Chapel Hill."
It is a talent, and it's one that has to grow, and mine did.
They came up with their own designs, you know. Believe me, back then, you know, we think of an architect, go to school to be an architect. Our daddies, uncles, they had the wisdom to design things that most people today pay for an architect. They were their own architecture, you know. They designed their rocks, and of course they designed fireplaces and underpinned houses with rock, and they did all of that.
My grandfather used to put signatures in his house. You can easily find the one in Mr. Neville's house. But I have not been able to find that, but I know what I'm looking for. So it's those type of things to see the ability, the craftness.
I'll give you an example. We had a mason one time that came to work with a pair of white shoes. He worked all day, and when he left, his shoes were still white. No mortar on them and all, and the quality of his work was superb.
And then people that knew us knew we were going to do a good job, and that's how we went on like that.
Good reputation.
Building was something that I could do, and I could look at it after it was finished and brag about it, because I was a hands-on, and I enjoyed doing things with my hands.
And when you say brag about it, you also must have been very good at it.
I had a reputation.
Being a builder was hard work. It required dedication and skill. Their hard work and sweat equity built the foundations not only for physical homes, but for the community as a whole.
He was a rock layer. He laid rocks, and which was a really tough job, and that was his profession.
I had one brother that took up the stone mason, and his son took it up. But other than that, the rest of them said it was too hard. They didn't want to get their hands dirty. Yeah, they didn't want to get their hands dirty. Yeah.
You don't really see a lot of young people going into the trades, like becoming plumbers, carpenters. In construction, you're going to have to get your hands dirty. It's back-breaking work, and the pay hasn't always been that great. But then if you get your own company and can get a reputation where you can go and get multiple jobs and keep things going, it can be a lucrative field to go into, but it's going to take some hard work.
When I first started, it was all black doing it because it was hard work, you know.
The cement that they used back in those days did not dry like cement. They got chemicals in the cement today. You can pour it today and you can finish it today. But back then, my dad would sit out there practically all night waiting for it to set up so he could trowel it and brush it during those days. Hard work and struggle back then, perseverance.
Right.
You know, we had to make it, so we made the best out of what we had, and that wasn't very much.
If they called him and they needed it, he'd go. And so when at his funeral, Reverend Manning said how many people had to call him at 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, and he came. And I think every hand in the church went up, you know. And, you know, and seeing we lived that way, and I think that was what the boys got tired of, because, you know, they were in school too, you know. But, you know, they had to get up and go and make sure that these people had water. They were dependable, that when you call them, they did show up.
Nobody can lay bricks for you.
Right.
You got to do it yourself. But you don't really learn the trade until you get a job and do it every day.
And he always had his hands were skilled because of the masonry and stuff that he had been doing for so long. So that was always a thing that I just rub his hands, and it was always so rough and whatnot. But it was, you know, because that was his thing, that masonry.
My point is that during those times, as we talk about how difficult the work and how hard the work was, they never got paid what they deserved. If you go and look at the Forest Theater right now, I was just over there a couple of months ago because they had a funeral there, and you see those rock and how they designed that like a theater, like a half moon, you know, sitting. It's amazing that they did all that hard work, but they never got paid for the work that they did. So I would say the university owes this family a great deal of gratitude and financial money. So we talk about paying it forward. They need to pay it forward, you know, and make it right.
If you had it to do all over again, would you do it again?
Yes, brick has been good to me.
The builders had great dignity and pride in the work they did and were respected for their craftsmanship. They knew their work was something to be proud of, and their family members continue to reflect that pride today.
And my daddy was a self-made cement finisher who did it for over 50 years. So as far as the rocks and the cement, oh man, my daddy, he was one of the best in Chapel Hill. Everybody wanted some cement work done, they come and got him.
I mean, they wasn't they wasn't boastful, but it had to be something that not only they were proud of, but the person who hired them got their money worth.
It was his passion. He did everything. He was a licensed electrician, and he, you know, was a carpenter.
It's hardly not a street or a road we haven't had any travel in and have done any work in. Because we've been all over the county and other counties as well.
Grandpa Jim worked on the campus of Chapel Hill. He worked for the Cokers with the Arboretum. He was the keeper for the university grounds. Most of the stonework in Chapel Hill was built by my uncle and my father.
And I've seen some people try to duplicate, but it's something about it that is just authentic, that, you know, some of the newer stuff just doesn't have quite that oomph. But yeah, I can always go around campus and sit and just kind of, you know, admire that work is still there.
We look back on how Chapel Hill was shaped. Our family helped shape Chapel Hill to be what it is today. Our older parents and uncles and grandfathers. Again, Chapel Hill is indebted to this family.
Everybody knew them and respected the family. And it helped us as we grew up. When people say, oh, you're Charlie Brooks' daughter, you're Charlie Brooks' grandson, they knew our family, they knew the history, and knew about our family. And that just gave us a lot of, comfort, and to know that they were well known like that and thought of.
Many of the builders were successful entrepreneurs. They were business owners who were involved in all aspects of the business, from doing the craft to managing the books. Many used their expertise to expand their businesses to do work across the state.
My grandfather and my father, they started out as subcontractors. They used to do a lot of work for like J.B. Goforth Security Builders. They even did some framing for Tate Construction. And in the early 70s, my father ended up obtaining his contractor license. And that's when they decided to go in business for themselves as general contractors. And so they stopped subbing for people, and they started doing their own work and advertising for their own business.
But he had his own business. He didn't work for anybody else. He did his own payroll and everything. And again, this was in the 50s. And most of his work he really did in Chatham County and Durham.
He just didn't want to work for anybody, because of how he was treated, when he was working.
If you have a craft, you got the ability to do things, you could take that discipline from learning that trade and you could add it to another one.
For me, I just did a lot of hard work. Back then, if you had your own business, you had to put a lot of hard work into it, and there was a lot to overcome as far as getting finances. If you wanted to go out and do stuff on your own, it was kind of hard to get the financing.
But the thing about being in business is you have to be very careful. If you are working outside of your capacity, you're in trouble. So to be successful, you got to stay inside your capacity.
Being a builder was family work. Generations worked alongside each other to build walls, homes, and community. Elders passed down their skills and knowledge to younger generations, keeping the craft alive.
It goes back all the way back to my great-grandfather, who was also a builder. He was the first Charles David Brooks. And then my granddaddy was Charles David Brooks II. And then on to my dad, Charles David Brooks III, and my brother, Charles David Brooks IV, and my nephew, Charles David Brooks V. He ended up being the last one in the company.
Charles Brooks was my grandfather. Okay. And then it went down to, as you know, Charles Brooks Jr., III, and the fourth. On my father's side, my father's name was Raymond Perry. He grew up in Chatham County and moved obviously to Chapel Hill. And he was the brick mason. The Brooks side kind of did the building with the carpentry, more the woodwork. My father was, with the brick and stone.
My brother did the brickwork and my cousin. Yeah, Zip, and I guess they all started that in high school. The football players had to work in construction in the summer because they didn't have the exercise equipment, so they felt that they were building up their muscles and stuff doing that. So my brothers used to work with my father, but they didn't like doing the plumbing part because they didn't like going up under the house and all of that stuff. So they didn't like doing the plumbing part. So when they were going to work, I think they were working with Handy Campbell and all of those that were brick masons. So they decided, I want to be a brick mason. So that was what Tom and so they ended up doing the brick. So the only way they didn't have to go to work with Dad with plumbing, they had to have something else to do. So they chose the brick.
My grandfather and most of the builders, they was eager to be tutors, to train other people how to do that type of work. And so, and it came in handy for us because we didn't have to look for a summer job because we already knew what we were going to be doing. So, but we found out, to have fun, the easy way to do it. And I was glad that, you know, I grew up around and knew the different type of tools and stuff to go when they send me for a tool. I know what to go get. But my Uncle Henry, especially my Uncle Leo, Lord forgive him. A new person come on the job, and he sent them for a brick bat. A brick bat. And they said, "What, a brick bat? Yeah, we got to hit this. We got to hit this brick into the wall. So when you go out there and look in the back of the truck and bring a brick bat." And they go out there and they look at it like you just try to hide. You know, you just try. Don't want to be laughing. You know, like, God, man, you guys not right. I said, but think about it. While they out there looking, they getting paid.
Of course, I had a few mentors, Grover Webb being one, and the Barbies the other one. Mm-hmm. And those are the ones that I tried to duplicate.
He did live to see integration take place before he died. Mm-hmm. But he did a lot of things to make sure that they had a future in building and in construction.
Beyond building physical structures, the builders built a community of cooperation and care. They built homes for their neighbors and provided vocational education for youth. They had a deep care for each other, the craft, and what they were building.
And they used to interview us and say, who's going to college? If you wasn't going to college, they would teach you a trade, carpentry, brick mason, and all that, and just went on from there.
A lot of the people we did work for, my father and my grandfather saved them a lot of money.
Mm-hmm, they did. A lot of the local residents would call on him because back then a lot of blacks didn't have money. Mm-hmm. They couldn't afford a lot of things. And so Dad, you know, was well known, and he would do work for people and say, you can pay me later and things of that nature, just pay me what you can. And that was, to me, very thoughtful.
Things like they would get together and, you know, help the church, you know, lay rocks or build a little podium out front where you put the name of the church and things like that.
You know, some maybe if he didn't have the money, he didn't say, well, I'm not going to do it, you know, but, you know, and eventually they did. And he'd never, and I used to always say, well, they're not paying you. Why are you doing it? He said, well, you know, they need it. They need water so they can go to work and stuff like that.
Over the past 2 years, neighbors have come together to design a gateway monument that will honor the community's black builders and masons. Members of the Jackson Center's Community Review Board, current and former builders and their families, and longtime residents have worked together to listen to oral histories with and about the community's builders and masons, identify key themes in those histories, and set priorities for the location and design of the Builders Gateway. The members of the Mount Olive Masonic Lodge in Carrboro were gracious enough to offer the space next to their building as a site for the gateway. Prism Design Lab worked with youth in the Jackson Center's 2024 Freedom School to engage young people in developing their own ideas for a possible design, and architect Murray Kamara brought their ideas back to the community design team and refined them over several gatherings to create the designs you see here. We are now in the process of estimating costs so that we can raise funds to construct this gateway and honor the craftsmanship and proud legacy of the black builders of Chapel Hill and Carrboro. The Jackson Center's namesake, Mrs. Marion Cheek Jackson, said that without the past, you have no future. Today we look to the builder's history as a blueprint for building a future where skill, hard work, creativity, entrepreneurial spirit, and mutual care will continue to inspire this community for generations to come.
I tell everybody this is, you know, one main thing in life that you need to understand. Key word is foundation. from a strong foundation, you can build anything. Now, what you built upon can crumble, but that foundation is strong, and you can build it back up.